The emergency alarm screamed to the massive halls of Galactic Station Prime, its piercing wail echoing off crystalline walls that stretched higher than Earth's tallest skyscrapers. In the circular chamber where representatives from 47 different species gathered daily to discuss trade routes and territorial disputes, the sound meant only one thing. Someone was dying in the void of space. Captain Veltar's voice crackled to the communication array, barely audible above the static of a dying transmission system. The pale blue colony commander's usually melodic tone was now rough with pain and desperation. His research vessel, the Harmony's Light, had been conducting routine geological surveys when their experimental jump drive malfunctioned catastrophically. Council, please respond. Engine core breach during jump sequence. Veltar's words came in broken gasps. Emergency landing on checking coordinates by the Void were on Terminus 9. The chamber erupted in horrified chittering, clicking, and low groans from species that communicated in frequencies humans couldn't even hear. Terminus 9 wasn't just any planet. It was on a forbidden list, marked with warnings in 17 different galactic languages. The massive red hologram that appeared above the assembly showed a world of perpetual storms, crushing gravity, an atmosphere that could dissolve most known metals. Life support systems failing rapidly. Veltar continued, his transmission growing weaker with each word. Atmospheric processors can't handle the external pressure. Hull integrity at 60% and dropping. Gravity is crushing some of the crew. 12 souls aboard, including 3 younglings on their first deep space assignment. Ambassador Threndal of the Cooperative Worlds stood on his 6 spindly legs, his translator device buzzing as it converted his rapid clicks into standard galactic speech. Council members, we must face reality. No rescue mission has ever succeeded on a Class X death world. The gravitational forces alone would crush any of our vessels before reaching the surface. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Everyone knew the statistics. Terminus 9 had claimed 14 research expeditions over the past 3 centuries. The planet's gravity was nearly 3 times standard. Its atmosphere was a toxic soup of corrosive gases, and the surface temperature fluctuated between freezing and molten depending on the constant electrical storms that raged across its surface. The Kalani are a gentle people, added Representative Zilvara, her melodic voice carrying the sorrow of her aquatic species. Their bones are hollow for efficiency in their homeworld's low gravity. They cannot survive such conditions for more than days, perhaps hours. As the debate continued, Veltar's voice returned, weaker now but still fighting. Hull breach in Section 7. Losing atmosphere fast. Some crew members already showing signs of pressure sickness. Please, if anyone can hear this, our younglings... The transmission cut to static. In the suffocating silence that followed, 47 species contemplated the mathematics of loss. Rescue ships would take weeks to reach Terminus 9, even if any vessel could survive the journey. The Kalani would be dead long before help arrived, their delicate bodies unable to withstand the crushing forces of a world that seemed designed to kill anything that dared set foot on its surface. It was then that a calm, steady voice cut through the despair. Earth's Emergency Response Division volunteers for the mission. Every head, tentacle, and optical sensor turned toward the human section of the assembly. Commander Jack Taylor stood at his simple metal podium, his brown hair slightly disheveled from the emergency summons. Unlike the elaborate ceremonial garments worn by other species, he was dressed in the plain blue uniform of Earth's Space Service, complete with patches indicating his experience in planetary rescue operations. The chamber fell completely silent. Humans had joined the galactic community only 3 years ago, after their first faster-than-light vessels had stumbled upon a trade convoy near the edge of their solar system. They were still considered newcomers, barely understanding galactic politics, and certainly not equipped for impossible rescue missions. Commander Taylor, Ambassador Threndal's voice carried a note of condescension. With respect, your species lacks experience in Class X environmental operations. This is not a matter of courage, but of simple physics. The conditions on Terminus 9 would kill your crew before they could even attempt a rescue. Jack Taylor's expression didn't change. He'd heard similar arguments during his 20 years of emergency response work on Earth, from Arctic research stations to deep ocean rescue operations. People always had very scientific reasons why certain rescues were impossible, right up until someone went out and did them anyway. Understood, Ambassador. We volunteer anyway. His voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had pulled survivors from burning buildings and sinking ships. The Defiant is equipped and ready to depart within the hour. The council members exchanged glances, clicks, and subsonic rumbles of communication. They were looking at what appeared to be naive heroism, a young species throwing their lives away in a doomed gesture. But protocol demanded they accept volunteers, even obviously suicidal ones. Very well, came the reluctant approval. May the void have mercy on your souls. The rescue vessel Defiant cut through space toward Terminus 9, its modest crew quarters buzzing with activity that would have seemed impossibly casual to the alien observers back at Galactic Station Prime. While the council members had spent hours debating the mathematical impossibility of survival, the 4-person human rescue team was doing what they did best, turning an impossible situation into a solvable problem. Commander Jack Taylor floated in the ship's compact medical bay, watching his team work with the kind of practice efficiency that came from years of pulling people out of places they weren't supposed to survive. The holographic display showed the colony distress data in stark blue light, medical readings that had baffled the galaxy's finest xenobiologists scrolling past in neat columns. Dr. Rebecca Clark pushed off from one wall and glided over to the data stream, her auburn hair tied back in a practical ponytail she'd worn during 15 years of emergency medicine on Earth. She'd worked everything from mountain rescue in the Himalayas to diving accidents in the North Sea, and something about the Kalani readings was nagging at her. "Tom, pull up those atmospheric pressure readings again," she called to Lieutenant Tom Brooks, who was floating near the navigation console with a tablet computer balanced on his knee. Brooks had grown up in Colorado, spent 8 years as a wilderness rescue specialist before joining the Space Service, and had an instinctive understanding of what happened to bodies under stress. "Here's what I'm seeing," Brooks said, highlighting sections of data with his finger. The Kalani homeworld has about 60% of Earth's gravity and a much thinner atmosphere. These poor souls crashed on a planet with nearly 3 times their normal gravity and atmospheric pressure. That's off the charts. "Exactly what I was thinking," Clark nodded, pulling up comparative medical data on her own screen. "Look at their symptoms. Difficulty breathing, disorientation, pain in the extremities, cellular breakdown in fingers and toes." Sergeant Lisa Murphy, who was checking equipment in the storage compartments, paused in her inventory. She'd spent 12 years as a paramedic in London before switching to space rescue, and had seen these exact symptoms more times than she cared to count. "That's textbook altitude sickness," Murphy said, securing a portable oxygen concentrator to the bulkhead, combined with what looks like decompression effects and crush injuries from the high gravity. The revelation hit all 4 team members simultaneously. While the galactic medical establishment had been stumped by what seemed like exotic alien pathology, the humans were looking at conditions they dealt with regularly. The Kalani weren't suffering from mysterious deathworld toxins. They were experiencing severe high-altitude pulmonary edema, the same condition that killed unprepared climbers on Mount Everest every year. "It's like they went from sea level to 30,000 feet instantly, then got crushed under a pile of rocks," Clark explained, pulling up treatment protocols from Earth's mountain rescue database. "The atmospheric composition isn't even that toxic for them. It's just the pressure differential that's killing them." Commander Taylor felt that familiar shift that happened when an impossible mission suddenly became merely difficult. He'd experienced it during hurricane rescues in the Gulf of Mexico, when what looked like certain death on the outside was actually just another application of proper equipment and technique. "What about the gravity situation?" he asked, checking their medical supplies. "Well, that's trickier," Brooks admitted, running calculations on his tablet. "But think about it. We train in high-G environments all the time for launch and emergency maneuvers. The Kalani are dealing with sustained high gravity that their bones can't handle, but we've got pressure suits designed for exactly this kind of stress." Murphy was already pulling equipment from storage compartments, her movements economical and sure. "I've got portable hyperbaric units that we use for diving accidents. If we can stabilize their pressure situation and get them into supportive harnesses to counteract the gravity, this becomes a standard medical evacuation." The team worked in comfortable silence for several minutes, modifying their equipment with the kind of improvisation that came naturally to humans. Where other species might have seen primitive medical technology, they saw tools perfectly adapted for pressure-related emergencies and trauma care in extreme environments. Clark was busy reprogramming their atmospheric processors to gradually adjust pressure differentials, the same technique used in decompression chambers for deep-sea divers. Brooks was calculating descent trajectories that would minimize gravitational stress on their own ship while allowing them to establish a stable rescue perimeter. Murphy was preparing medical kits specifically designed for crush injuries and altitude sickness. You know what the really interesting part is? Taylor said, watching his team transform their ship into a mobile emergency room. The council thinks we're being heroic. They have no idea we do this kind of thing every Tuesday back home. The truth was starting to dawn on all of them. Earth itself was what the galaxy would classify as a death world. Humans had evolved on a planet with crushing gravity, a corrosive oxygen atmosphere, extreme weather patterns, and geological instability that regularly killed thousands of people. What seemed impossible to species from gentler worlds was just another day at the office for people who had spent their entire evolutionary history surviving in conditions that would terrify most of galactic civilization. 15 hours to Terminus 9, Brooks announced, checking their approach vector. Plenty of time to set up, Clark replied, already laying out surgical instruments. Just like that avalanche rescue in the Alps last year, except with slightly different gravity. The casual confidence in her voice would have shocked the council members, but it was exactly what Jack Taylor had hoped to hear. The Defiant shuddered violently as it hit the outer atmosphere of Terminus 9, its hull groaning under forces that would have torn apart most civilian vessels in the galaxy. Commander Jack Taylor gripped his pilot controls with steady hands, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with flying into something that wanted to kill you. Hull temperature rising fast. Lieutenant Tom Brooks called out from his monitoring station, watching readouts that were climbing into the red zone. We've got electrical storms building on 3 vectors, and the gravitational readings are all over the place. Through the reinforced viewports, Terminus 9 looked like a vision of cosmic rage. Lightning arced between massive storm clouds that stretched across entire continents, each bolt carrying enough energy to power a small city. The planet's surface shifted between zones of frozen methane plains and active volcanic regions, creating a patchwork of death that seemed designed by some malevolent intelligence. Just like flying into Hurricane Patricia over the Gulf, Taylor muttered, adjusting their descent angle to avoid the worst of the electrical activity. He'd piloted rescue helicopters through Category 5 storms before joining the Space Service, and while the scale was different, the principles remained the same. Respect the weather, but don't let it intimidate you. The ship bucked hard to starboard as they hit a pocket of superheated plasma, throwing Sergeant Lisa Murphy against her safety harness. She was busy securing medical equipment in the cargo bay, making sure their portable hyperbaric units wouldn't become deadly projectiles during the rough descent. Remind me why we couldn't just send down an unmanned probe first. Murphy shouted over the noise of straining metal and roaring engines. Because those Kalani folks don't have time for a proper reconnaissance, Dr. Rebecca Clark answered, checking her medical readouts one final time. She was monitoring the crash site through their long-range sensors, and the life signs were getting weaker by the hour. Besides, when did we ever have perfect intelligence on a rescue mission? Another massive jolt rocked the ship as they punched through a layer of corrosive clouds that immediately began eating at their hull plating. Warning alarms filled the cabin with urgent beeping, but the crew continued their work with the calm efficiency of people who had learned to function under pressure. There! Brooks pointed at his screen, where a faint heat signature appeared between 2 jagged mountain peaks. Got the crash site. Looks like they came down in some kind of crystalline canyon system. The tactical display showed the Harmony's light wedge between formations of razor-sharp crystal structures that rose from the canyon floor like frozen lightning. The Kalani ship was cracked open like an egg, its atmosphere venting into the toxic air through multiple hull breaches. How's the ground look for landing? Taylor asked, fighting the controls as another electrical storm tried to push them off course. Unstable as hell, Brooks replied, scanning the geological data. The whole area is seismically active, Those crystal formations appear to be growing upward through some kind of pressure system from deep underground. Sound like the ice caves we worked in Alaska, Murphy observed, strapping herself into her deployment harness. Except these ones are probably sharp enough to cut through our suits. Taylor brought the Defiant into a steep descent pattern, using the planet's own violent weather systems to mask their approach. The ship's heat shields glowed cherry red as they dropped through layers of atmosphere that would have been instantly lethal to most galactic species, but seemed merely uncomfortable to the human crew. "Contact," Brooks suddenly announced. "I'm picking up weak transmissions from the Kalani ship. At least some of them are still alive down there." Through the swirling storms, they could make out the crashed vessel more clearly now. The elegant curves of Kalani's ship design, built for the gentle environments of peaceful worlds, had been brutally twisted by the impact. Sections of the hull were completely gone, and they could see the faint glow of emergency lighting inside what remained of the crew compartments. "Set us down on that flat section, about 200 meters from their ship," Taylor ordered, pointing to a relatively stable piece of ground between the crystal formations. "Close enough to establish a rescue perimeter, far enough that we won't get crushed if those crystals decide to grow some more." The landing was rough by galactic standards, but smooth by the measure of emergency operations on hostile worlds. The Defiant's reinforced landing struts absorbed the impact as they touched down on ground that immediately began shifting under their weight. Through the viewports, they could see the surface was a mix of frozen gases and superheated rock, with temperatures that fluctuated wildly as electrical storms passed overhead. "Atmospheric readings are as bad as advertised," Clark reported, checking her instruments. "The air outside would dissolve most of our standard equipment within hours, and the pressure differential is extreme." "Standard Death World deployment, then," Taylor announced, beginning his pre-mission checklist. "Full environmental suits, portable atmosphere processors, and emergency medical protocols for extreme pressure injuries." The crew began suiting up with the practice movements of people who had done this dozens of times before. What they were preparing for would have seemed like an elaborate suicide mission to most of galactic civilization, but to the humans it felt like just another challenging rescue operation in a hostile environment. Seismic activity picking up, Brooks warned as the ground shook beneath them. "Those crystal formations are definitely unstable." "Then we better work fast," Murphy replied, checking her medical kit one final time. "Just like that mine collapse in Wales, except with more exotic ways to die." Through the storms and chaos, they could see the Kalani ship's emergency lights flickering weakly, like a dying heartbeat in the darkness. The moment Dr. Rebecca Clark stepped through the airlock of the Kalani ship, she knew exactly what she was dealing with. The scene inside the Harmony's light looked like every high-altitude rescue she'd ever worked, just with blue-skinned aliens instead of human climbers. Captain Veltar lay crumpled near what had been the ship's command center, his normally graceful limbs twisted at unnatural angles. His breathing came in short, desperate gasps, and the pale blue of his skin had taken on a sickly purple tinge around his fingertips and lips. 3 other Kalani crew members were unconscious nearby, their delicate bone structure clearly unable to handle the crushing gravity of Terminus 9. "Classic altitude sickness presentation," Clark muttered into her comm, pulling out her portable scanner. "Severe hypoxia, probable cerebral edema, and what looks like crush injuries to the lower extremities." Behind her, Sergeant Lisa Murphy was already setting up the portable hyperbaric unit they'd carried in from the Defiant. The device looked primitive compared to the elegant medical equipment scattered around the Kalani ship, but it had been designed for exactly this kind of emergency. "How many survivors?" Commander Jack Taylor's voice crackled through their helmet comms as he coordinated the rescue operation from outside. "I count 8 still breathing," Murphy reported, checking pulse readings on the unconscious Kalani. "For our in critical condition, the others are stable but deteriorating fast." Clark moved to the youngest Kalani crew member, barely more than a child by their species standards. The youngling's large eyes were unfocused, and she was making the same confused, disoriented sound that Clark had heard from dozens of mountain climbers suffering from severe oxygen deprivation. "Hey there, sweetie," Clark said softly, even though she knew the alien couldn't understand English. She'd learned long ago that tone of voice was universal, and medical care always worked better when patients felt safe. "We're going to get you feeling better, okay?" The hyperbaric chamber hummed to life as Murphy finished the setup. It was a far cry from the hospital-grade equipment they prefer, but it would do the job. Clark had used similar devices to treat diving accidents in the North Sea and altitude sickness in the Himalayas. Starting pressure normalization, Murphy announced, carefully monitoring the atmospheric readings, bringing them down slowly from this crushing pressure differential. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Tom Brooks was outside dealing with what the Kalani had described as deadly environmental hazards. The acid rain that had been eating through their ship's hull was indeed corrosive, but Brooks had worked oil platform rescues in weather that was nearly as nasty. Just like that chemical plant explosion in Manchester, he radioed back to the team, nasty stuff, but nothing our suits can't handle for a few hours. The ground beneath them shuddered as another seismic event shook the canyon, sending several of the crystal formations crashing down nearby. Brooks barely looked up from his work, setting up atmospheric processors around the crash site. Unstable terrain, but we've dealt with worse, he reported calmly. Remember that earthquake rescue in California? At least this time we know the ground is going to move. Inside the ship, Clark was working on Captain Veltar with techniques that would have seemed barbarically simple to galactic medical standards. She was treating him exactly like a human who had fallen from a great height and then been trapped at high altitude for days. Suspected internal injuries from a gravity differential, she explained to Murphy while setting up in 4-line. His bone density is about half what a human's would be. It's like he's been carrying twice his body weight for the past day and a half. The treatment was straightforward by Earth medical standards. Gradual pressure reduction to treat the decompression effects, oxygen therapy for the altitude sickness, and supportive care for the crush injuries. Clark had done the same procedures hundreds of times for human patients, just never on aliens whose biology was remarkably similar to their own. Pressure coming down nicely, Murphy reported, watching the hyperbaric readings. Their blood oxygen levels are starting to improve. What amazed Clark wasn't that the treatments were working. She'd expected they would. What amazed her was how familiar everything felt. The Kalani were suffering from exactly the same physiological responses that human mountain rescue teams dealt with regularly. You know what's funny? She said to Murphy while checking on another patient. The council thinks we're performing miracles here. This is just Tuesday afternoon emergency medicine back home. Outside, Brooks had established a stable atmospheric zone around the crash site, using techniques developed for hazardous material rescues and chemical plant disasters. The toxic atmosphere that had been slowly killing the Kalani was certainly dangerous, but no worse than the industrial accidents he'd worked in his previous career. Atmospheric processors are holding steady, he reported. We got clean air and stable pressure for about 50 meters around the ship. Taylor was coordinating the overall operation with the calm efficiency of someone who had managed disaster responses in multiple time zones. While galactic observers would have seen chaos and impossible conditions, he saw a complex but manageable multi-casualty incident. Medical status report, he requested. All survivors are responding to treatment, Clark answered, watching as Captain Veltar's breathing began to ease. Give me another 6 hours of pressure therapy and supportive care, and they'll be stable for transport. The youngest Kalani crew member opened her large eyes and looked directly at Clark, her expression clearing as the oxygen therapy took effect. She made a soft, trilling sound that Clark somehow understood was gratitude. You're welcome, kiddo. Clark smiled behind her helmet visor. Just doing our job. 36 hours after departing for what the Galactic Council had considered a suicide mission, the Defiant docked smoothly at Galactic Station Prime with all 12 Kalani crew members alive, conscious, and asking for seconds at dinner. The rescue that was supposed to be impossible had been completed with the kind of casual efficiency that made it look almost routine. Commander Jack Taylor walked through the station's corridors toward the council chambers, nodding politely to the various alien species who stopped to stare at him. Word had already spread through the station's gossip networks that the humans had actually succeeded, but most beings were still struggling to understand how. Inside the medical bay of the Defiant, Dr. Rebecca Clark was wrapping up her final examinations of the Kalani survivors. Captain Veltar sat upright on a medical bed, his natural blue coloration fully restored and his breathing completely normal. The transformation was so complete that it seemed miraculous to galactic medical observers who had been monitoring the rescue. "How do you feel?" Clark asked, running her scanner over Veltar's chest one more time to check his lung function. "Like I had been given a second life," the Kalani captain replied, his melodic voice filled with wonder. "Your medicine. It seemed so simple, yet our finest healers could not understand what was happening to us." Clark smiled and closed her medical kit. "Sometimes a simple approach is the right approach. You weren't suffering from some exotic alien disease, yet altitude sickness, decompression effects, and crush injuries. We see the same things in human mountain climbers and deep-sea divers all the time." This casual explanation was overheard by Representative Zilvara of the Aquatic Coalition, who had been documenting the recovery process for the council records. Her large, fish-like eyes widened as she processed what the human doctor had just said. "You mean to say," Zilvara spoke slowly, "that this Class X Death World environment produces conditions you encounter regularly in your medical practice?" "Well, sure," Clark replied, not understanding why this was surprising. "Humans live and work in extreme environments all the time. Mountain rescue, deep-sea operations, volcanic research, Arctic expeditions. This was just a more extreme version of the same basic problems." In the council chambers, Taylor was presenting his mission report to an audience that seemed unable to fully grasp what they were hearing. The holographic footage from the rescue showed humans working in conditions that should have been instantly lethal, treating the crisis with the same calm professionalism they might use for a routine medical emergency. Total mission duration was 36 hours, Taylor reported matter-of-factly. Weather conditions were challenging, but within acceptable parameters for our equipment. All survivors were successfully stabilized using standard Earth medical protocols for pressure-related injuries and environmental exposure. Ambassador Threndal's translator device buzzed frantically as he tried to formulate a response. "Commander Taylor, you described standard protocols for conditions that our best scientists consider unsurvivable. How is this possible?" Taylor paused, realizing for the first time that what seemed obvious to him might not be obvious to everyone else. "Well, sir, Earth has similar conditions in various locations. High-altitude environments, deep ocean pressure, extreme weather, seismic activity, toxic atmospheric conditions in certain regions. Humans have been living and working in places like that for thousands of years." A stunned silence fell over the chamber as the implications of this statement began to sink in. Slowly, painfully, the assembled representatives of galactic civilization began to understand something that would fundamentally change how they viewed humanity. The gentle Kalani lived on a world with low gravity and a carefully balanced atmosphere. The aquatic races had evolved in the stable depths of peaceful oceans. The insectoid species came from worlds with minimal weather variation and predictable geological conditions. Most of galactic civilization had developed on what humans would consider paradise worlds. Earth, by galactic standards, was itself a Class X death world. "Your home world," Representative Zilvara spoke slowly, "has crushing gravity, a corrosive oxygen atmosphere, violent weather patterns, and geological instability." "I mean, we don't usually think of it that way," Taylor replied honestly. "But yeah, Earth can be pretty rough. We get hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, blizzards, floods, droughts. The atmosphere is about 21% oxygen, which I guess is pretty reactive. Gravity is, well, it's normal for us." Dr. Clark's voice came over the communication system from the medical bay, where she was still being interviewed by xenobiologists who couldn't understand how her treatments had worked. "The interesting thing is that the Kalani physiology is actually quite similar to human physiology," she was explaining. "They just evolved on a much gentler world. It's like they're humans who never had to deal with mountains, deep oceans, or severe weather. Once you understand that, treating them becomes straightforward." Lieutenant Tom Brooks chimed in from the engineering section, where he was being questioned about how their equipment had survived conditions that should have destroyed it instantly. "Our gear is built for Earth conditions," he explained patiently. "Extreme weather, chemical exposure, high pressure, seismic activity. What you call a death world, we call home. This mission was challenging, sure, but it wasn't fundamentally different from a rescue operation in the Himalayas or the middle of a hurricane." Back in the council chambers, the full weight of revelation was settling over the assembled representatives. The humans hadn't performed miracles or displayed superhuman courage. They had simply applied their normal, everyday survival skills to a situation that seemed impossible only to species from gentler worlds. Captain Veltar's voice came through the communication system, addressing the council directly. They did not see Terminus 9 as a death world, he said, his words carrying across the chamber with crystal clarity. They saw it as Tuesday. The silence that followed was broken by the soft chiming of an incoming priority transmission. Another distress call, this time from a research station orbiting Terminus 15, where a reactor malfunction had stranded 43 beings in what the galaxy considered utterly hopeless conditions. Taylor checked the mission parameters on his datapad and looked up at the council. "We can be ready to depart in 2 hours," he said simply. "Should I prep the team?" The casual confidence in his voice sent a collective shiver through species that were beginning to understand that humanity's place in the galaxy might be very different from what anyone had imagined.